The sharp crack of a perfect shot echoed through the elite shooters club, followed by thunderous applause from wealthy patrons dressed in designer shooting gear. Blake Radcliffe lowered his custom Remington 700, a satisfied smirk spreading across his perfectly tanned face as the electronic display showed another flawless bullseye. This was his kingdom, his sanctuary, a world where money, power, and exceptional skill created an impenetrable barrier between the elite and everyone else. Welcome back to HOA Unleashed, where we explore the extraordinary moments that remind us never to judge by appearances alone. If you've ever felt invisible in a room full of important people, or been dismissed because you didn't fit someone's narrow expectations of success, you'll want to stay for what happened next. This is the story of how one woman's quiet strength shattered the arrogance of privilege with nothing more than 3 perfect shots and unwavering determination. At America's most prestigious shooting range, Emma Miller stood near the imposing marble entrance, clutching her weathered leather purse with nervous fingers. Her simple navy cardigan and department store jeans made her appear as out of place as a dandelion growing in a carefully manicured rose garden. At 35, she was neither young enough to turn heads with her beauty, nor successful enough to command respect in these exclusive circles where net worth determines social standing. The receptionist, a young woman whose blonde highlights probably cost more than Emma's monthly grocery budget, glanced up from her computer screen with the practiced indifference typically reserved for obvious outsiders who had somehow wandered into places they clearly didn't belong. "Excuse me," Emma said softly, her voice barely carrying over the ambient conversation in distant gunfire. "I'd like to register for today's open practice session." The receptionist's expertly made-up eyes performed a quick but thorough assessment, traveling dismissively from Emma's sensible walking shoes to her unremarkable ponytail, clearly categorizing her as someone who posed no threat to the established social order. "Members and their invited guests only today," she replied with barely concealed disdain, already looking past Emma toward more promising prospects entering behind her. Emma took a steadying breath and reached into her worn purse, withdrawing a slightly crumpled white envelope that looked decidedly out of place among the gold-embossed invitations typically presented here. "I have a guest pass," she said quietly. "It was sent to me as a gift." Across the expansive shooting floor, Blake Radcliffe noticed the minor disturbance at the reception desk. At 42 years old, he embodied everything the elite shooters club represented: generational wealth from his family's oil empire, 5 national championships earned through relentless competition, an Olympic gold medal that opened every door in the sport, and lucrative endorsement deals that had made him the recognizable face of premium firearms manufacturing. His natural charisma and competitive fire had built an empire around his shooting prowess, complete with social media followers, corporate sponsorships, and the kind of celebrity status that came from being the undisputed best in an exclusive world. "Well, well," Blake announced loudly enough for his carefully cultivated entourage to hear clearly, "looks like someone took a serious wrong turn on their way to the public shooting range downtown." His voice carried that particular tone of amused condescension that wealthy people often used when encountering those they considered beneath their social station. His companions, a carefully selected mixture of corporate executives, minor celebrities, and ambitious social climbers, laughed right on cue, their attention now focused entirely on the woman making her awkward way toward the basic practice area, with her eyes fixed firmly on the polished marble floor. Rebecca Martinez, the club's operations manager, and herself a former competitive shooter who had earned respect through skill rather than inheritance, winced visibly at Blake's unnecessarily cruel comment, but remained professionally silent. She had witnessed this particular dynamic play out too many times before, and while it always left her uncomfortable, challenging Blake Radcliffe's behavior was a luxury her employment status couldn't afford. Emma found an isolated station at the far end of the basic range, the kind of spot typically reserved for nervous beginners and the occasional curious spouse dragged along to humor their shooting enthusiast partner. She carefully placed her purse on the small equipment shelf and withdrew a neatly folded cloth bundle, handling it with the kind of reverent care usually reserved for precious family heirlooms. With practiced economical movements that spoke of countless repetitions, she unfolded the protective material to reveal a standard Glock 19, Functional, reliable, and well-maintained, but absolutely nothing like the custom masterpieces worth more than luxury cars that populated the premium shooting stations throughout the rest of the facility. Blake and his circle of admirers had gradually migrated closer to Emma's position, drawn by the irresistible prospect of entertainment at the expense of someone who clearly didn't belong in their rarefied atmosphere. The anticipation of watching an obvious amateur embarrass herself was simply too tempting to resist. $20 says she can't even hit the paper target, one of Blake's companions stage whispered, with barely suppressed amusement, clearly enjoying the developing spectacle. Blake scoffed dismissively, his confidence absolute and his voice carrying easily across the space between them. Make it $20,000. I'll bet serious money she's never held anything more dangerous than a stapler in her entire sheltered life. The casual mention of such an enormous sum, more than many people earned in half a year, drew additional attention from nearby club members who began gathering to witness what promised to be either spectacular entertainment or a complete embarrassment, depending on one's perspective. Sensing an opportunity to assert his dominance while providing amusement for his audience, Blake sauntered over to Emma's modest shooting station with the confident swagger of someone accustomed to being the center of attention wherever he went. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his tone dripping with the kind of false politeness that barely concealed obvious condescension. "Are you absolutely certain you're in the right building today? The community center recreational programs are located about 6 blocks in that direction." Emma finally looked up from her methodical preparation routine, her steady dark eyes meeting Blake's ice blue gaze with a calmness that momentarily disrupted his confident rhythm. There was something in her expression, not fear or intimidation, but a quiet steadiness that suggested depths he hadn't expected to encounter. "I'm just here to practice," she replied quietly, her voice carrying no defensiveness or apology, merely a simple statement of fact that somehow managed to convey both dignity and determination. Blake recovered his composure quickly, his confidence bolstered by the growing audience and his absolute certainty in his superior position. "Practice," he laughed, the sound carrying clearly across the range. "Sweetheart, this is where serious professionals train. Real marksmen who've dedicated their lives to perfection. How about we make this interesting? $25,000 says you can't hit a bullseye from 50 yards. Emma's expression remained perfectly neutral, but something indefinable flickered behind her eyes. Not fear or uncertainty, but what looked almost like calculation, as if she were rapidly processing information and coming to some internal decision. "I don't have that kind of money," she replied honestly, her voice steady despite the enormous sum being casually thrown around, as if it were pocket change. Blake's predatory smile widened considerably, sensing what he interpreted as weakness and the approaching moment of complete victory. "If by some absolute miracle you actually make the shot, I'll pay every penny. If you miss, and trust me, you absolutely will miss, you walk out of here immediately and never come back. Simple as that. Deal?" Rebecca Martinez had approached during this exchange, her professional concern becoming increasingly evident as she watched the situation develop. As the club's manager, she had both a responsibility to maintain order and a growing sense that this confrontation was spiraling beyond reasonable bounds. "Mr. Radcliffe," she interjected diplomatically, "perhaps we should allow our guest to practice without additional pressure or distractions." Blake dismissed her suggestion with an irritated wave of his hand, never taking his focused attention away from Emma. "Stay completely out of this, Rebecca. We're just having a friendly conversation between fellow shooting enthusiasts." Emma's gaze dropped momentarily to her left hand, where a simple gold wedding band caught the overhead lights with understated elegance. She twisted it once in a gesture so subtle and brief that only the most observant witnesses would have noticed it, a movement that seemed to carry significant personal meaning. When she looked up again, something fundamental had shifted in her bearing, though the change was so slight that most observers would have missed it entirely. "All right," she said quietly, her voice carrying with newfound resolve. "I accept your challenge." Blake's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise before his expression quickly settled into an expression of triumphant satisfaction. The prospect of such an easy and public victory was almost too good to believe. "Excellent," he announced to the substantial crowd that had gathered around them. Ladies and gentlemen, we have ourselves some genuine entertainment today. What absolutely none of the assembled observers noticed was the subtle but complete transformation in Emma's posture as she picked up her Glock with practiced familiarity. Her spine straightened imperceptibly into perfect alignment, her shoulders relaxed into optimal positioning, and her feet shifted automatically into a stance that spoke eloquently of countless hours of disciplined, professional training. No one recognized the expert grip she employed, the controlled breathing pattern that preceded her shot, or the focused stillness that seemed to surround her like an invisible barrier against outside distractions. And absolutely no one in that exclusive club realized that the simple gold wedding band Emma wore with such obvious reverence had once belonged to Master Chief Nathan Miller, one of the most legendary precision snipers in the entire history of SEAL Team 6, a man whose unofficial nickname, the Ghost, had been earned through impossible shots under impossible conditions in the world's most dangerous places. 3 years earlier, Emma had stood beneath a gray April sky at Arlington National Cemetery, the sharp ceremonial crack of the honor guard's rifles cutting through the solemn silence like knife blades through silk. The carefully folded American flag pressed against her chest felt impossibly heavy, as if it contained the weight of all her shattered dreams and uncertain future. As she watched her husband's flag-draped casket being lowered slowly into the hallowed ground that held so many American heroes. Master Chief Nathan Miller had served his country with extraordinary distinction for 16 years, his exceptional abilities as a precision marksman earning him both classified commendations and the respectful nickname, the Ghost, among special operations personnel who understood the true meaning of legendary skill under pressure. The official military report cited mechanical failure during what was described as a routine training exercise. Emma knew the reality was far more complex and dangerous. There were crucial aspects of Nathan's final mission that would remain permanently redacted from any public record, classified secrets that died with him in service to national security. They had first met in Burlington, Vermont, during one of Nathan's rare periods of leave when he was visiting a fellow SEAL who was recovering from serious combat injuries at the local VA medical center. Emma had been working as a senior accountant at a well-respected mid-sized firm, her daily life as predictable and carefully organized as the financial statements and budget reports she managed with meticulous attention to detail. Their chance encounter at a busy downtown coffee shop had begun with awkward apologies over accidentally spilled coffee and somehow stretched into hours of conversation that felt like coming home after a lifetime of searching. There had been something immediate and undeniable in their connection, a recognition that transcended their vastly different backgrounds and life experiences. They married just 8 months later in a simple but meaningful ceremony attended by Emma's small family and a carefully selected handful of Nathan's teammates. Men with alert, watchful eyes who spoke little but seemed to observe everything with the kind of professional awareness that came from years of operating in hostile environments. Life as a Navy SEAL's wife had taught Emma to exist comfortably in the uncertain spaces between knowing and not knowing, between presence and absence, between the person Nathan was at home and the classified professional he became when duty called. She learned to live with the reality that her husband would disappear for weeks or months at a time, returning with new scars he couldn't explain and nightmares he couldn't share due to operational security requirements. The nature of Nathan's work meant that their most intimate conversations were often filled with careful omissions and unspoken truths, a dance around classified realities that created both distance and deeper understanding between them. "I wish I could tell you everything about what I do out there," Nathan would say during their quiet moments together, his calloused thumb gently tracing her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "But I can tell you this with absolute certainty. You're the reason I fight to come home every single time." It was during an extended period stateside, while Nathan was recovering from a torn ACL suffered during a mission that had left him with forced rehabilitation time, that he first brought Emma to a civilian shooting range for what he described as basic personal protection training. "If I'm going to be deployed so frequently," he had explained patiently while gently adjusting her stance with experienced hands, "I need to know, beyond any doubt, that you can protect yourself if something unexpected happens while I'm away." What began as a straightforward safety course and basic firearms familiarization evolved gradually into something much deeper and more meaningful. A shared activity that gave Emma genuine insight into her husband's professional world while simultaneously strengthening their personal connection in ways that surprised them both. Nathan proved to be an extraordinarily patient and skilled instructor, approaching Emma's training with the same methodical professionalism he brought to his military duties. Emma, for her part, discovered an unexpected natural aptitude that seemed to surprise everyone, including herself. "You're an absolute natural at this," Nathan had whispered after Emma achieved her first perfect bullseye, genuine pride evident in his voice and expression. "You have the three essential qualities that separate good shooters from truly exceptional ones: steady hands that don't shake under pressure, perfect vision that can track minute details, and the psychological ability to maintain absolute calm when everything around you is chaotic." Over the following 3 years, whenever Nathan's operational duties and deployment schedule permitted, they practiced together with religious dedication. He taught her everything he knew: proper stance and grip techniques, breathing control for maximum stability, sight alignment and trigger discipline, wind reading and distance calculation, and the mental preparation that separated professionals from amateurs. "Exceptional marksmanship isn't about aggression or raw force," Nathan would explain patiently during their training sessions. "It's about achieving complete and total control over your body, your breathing, your heartbeat, and most importantly, your mind. Everything else is just mechanical execution." Emma absorbed every lesson with dedicated focus, finding unexpected peace and clarity in the discipline and ritual of precision shooting. Those sessions at various ranges became sacred time for both of them, moments of genuine connection that transcended the need for words or detailed explanations about Nathan's classified work. Sometimes Nathan's teammates would join their practice sessions, and Emma gradually earned their hard-won respect through consistent improvement and quiet competence that spoke louder than any boasting or self-promotion ever could. "The boss never stops talking about your progress," Sergeant Michael Torres had confided to Emma during one memorable training session. "He says you're developing better natural instincts and technical skills than half the recruits he's trained professionally in military settings." The last time they practiced together was exactly 48 hours before Nathan departed for what would ultimately become his final deployment. He had been unusually quiet that day, more focused on carefully observing Emma's technique than working on improving his own already exceptional abilities. "Promise me something important," Nathan had said, his voice rough with uncharacteristic emotion as they cleaned their weapons and packed up their equipment. "Promise me you'll keep practicing regularly, even when I'm not here to coach you through it." Emma had nodded readily, not fully understanding the weight and significance behind his request or the premonition that had prompted such an urgent plea. After the military funeral with its formal honors and ceremonial traditions, Emma found herself completely unable to bring herself to visit any shooting range. Nathan's carefully maintained firearms remained locked securely in their gun safe, untouched and slowly gathering dust like abandoned relics of a life that no longer existed. She relocated to Boston, accepting a position at a large corporate accounting firm where absolutely no one knew her personal history as the widow of a fallen American hero. Just another professional trying to rebuild a completely shattered life from whatever pieces remained. Until exactly 1 week ago, when an unexpected package arrived from Sergeant Michael Torres containing a guest pass to the Elite Shooters Club and a handwritten note that would change everything. "Nathan would want you to keep your promise to him. 3 years of grieving and isolation is long enough, Emma. It's time to rejoin the living and honor his memory properly." Now standing in the exclusive academy, with Blake Radcliffe's arrogant challenge hanging in the air like a gauntlet thrown down in contempt, Emma felt something long dormant beginning to stir within her. A spark of the confident, capable person she had been before grief had completely hollowed out her sense of purpose and self-worth. As she lifted the familiar weight of the Glock, muscle memory that had been sleeping for 3 years suddenly took complete control. The noisy, crowded shooting range seemed to fade away until her world narrowed to three essential points of focus: herself, the weapon in her hands, and the distant target that represented far more than just a simple challenge. Emma took one measured, deliberate breath, held it for precisely the right moment, then released exactly half while applying steady controlled pressure to the trigger with the pad of her index finger, just as Nathan had taught her during hundreds of practice sessions. The shot rang out crisp and clean in the suddenly hushed academy, cutting through the ambient noise like a blade through silence. Through the settling echo that seemed to hang in the air forever, the mechanical whir of the automated target retrieval system seemed unnaturally loud in the complete silence that had fallen over the assembled crowd. Blake maintained his expression of amused confidence, though careful observers might have noticed uncertainty beginning to creep across his features as he belatedly registered Emma's textbook shooting stance and the thoroughly professional way she had handled her firearm. There was something about her technique that didn't match his assumptions about amateur shooters. The target moved slowly toward them along its mechanical track, building suspense with each deliberate click of the retrieval mechanism while the entire crowd held its collective breath in anticipation. When the paper target finally arrived within clear viewing distance, a perfect circular hole marked the exact geometric center of the bullseye with surgical precision. The silence that followed was profound and complete, a total vacuum of sound where Blake and his entire entourage struggled desperately to process what they were witnessing. This result simply didn't fit the narrative they had constructed about amateur shooters and beginner's luck. Emma calmly placed the Glock on the shooting counter with the same reverent care she had shown throughout, her facial expression completely unchanged, as if hitting perfect shots at 50 yards was the most natural and expected thing in the world. Blake snatched the target from the retrieval mechanism, examining it closely with growing desperation, as if intensive scrutiny might reveal some previously unnoticed flaw or evidence of elaborate trickery that would restore his worldview to its proper order. "Beginner's luck," he finally declared, his voice carrying a sharp defensive edge that hadn't been there before. "Anyone can get lucky exactly once. Lightning doesn't strike the same place twice." Rebecca stepped forward immediately, her professional composure slipping slightly to reveal genuine admiration mixed with surprise. "That was truly an exceptional shot, Miss Miller," Emma supplied quietly, using her maiden name from long-standing habit developed during her years of deliberate anonymity. Rebecca nodded respectfully, offering a smile that managed to be both genuinely apologetic for Blake's behavior and sincerely impressed by the demonstration she had just witnessed. "Miss Miller, perhaps you would be interested in trying our advanced range facilities. You're clearly far from being a beginner." Before Emma could formulate any response, Blake interjected with sharp urgency. "Hold on just 1 minute here. One lucky shot doesn't magically transform an obvious amateur into a professional marksman. Let's see if lightning can actually strike twice, with real consequences this time." An uncomfortable murmur rippled through the growing crowd of spectators who had been drawn by the unusual commotion and were now witnessing something far more dramatic than they had anticipated. $50,000, Blake announced with theatrical flourish, producing his expensive leather checkbook from his jacket pocket like a weapon. "If you can place 3 consecutive bullseyes at 75 yards, 3 absolutely perfect shots with no margin for error, I'll pay every penny. If you miss even one shot, you publicly admit you got lucky today and agree never to return to this establishment or any other respectable shooting facility." Senator Williams, one of Blake's longtime supporters and political connections, placed a cautioning hand on the champion's shoulder with obvious concern. "Blake, perhaps this isn't the appropriate time or place for such dramatic escalation." Blake shrugged off the contact with visible irritation, his focus entirely consumed by the challenge he was creating. "What's the matter, Senator? Afraid our mysterious visitor's little trick won't work 3 consecutive times?" Emma found herself at a crossroads she had never anticipated. Part of her wanted nothing more than to collect her belongings quietly and walk away from this increasingly public spectacle, returning to the safe anonymity she had carefully constructed around her grief and loss. She had come here today only to honor her solemn promise to Nathan, not to engage in ego contests or public demonstrations that threatened to expose her to unwanted attention and scrutiny. But something deeper and more fundamental in Blake's dismissive arrogance awakened a fire that had been dormant within her for far too long. A sense of injustice not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated, excluded, or dismissed based solely on their appearance or social status. "I'll accept your challenge. Emma said softly, her voice carrying clearly despite its quiet tone. On one condition that's non-negotiable. When I win, the $50,000 goes directly to the Veteran Support Foundation. Blake hesitated for just a moment, clearly not having expected this particular twist, before nodding curtly with renewed confidence. Fine by me. It's not like you're actually going to win anyway. As Emma moved deliberately to the 75-yard shooting line, Rebecca approached her with obvious professional concern written across her features. Miss Miller, I feel obligated to inform you that Mr. Radcliffe holds the current club record at this particular distance. No other shooter has successfully challenged his benchmark performance in over 5 years. Emma nodded gratefully, genuinely appreciating both the warning and the respect underlying it. Thank you for your concern, Miss Martinez. I understand exactly what the stakes are. Rebecca studied her carefully, noting again the quiet confidence that seemed completely at odds with Emma's modest appearance and unassuming manner. There was something about this woman's composure that suggested hidden depths of experience and capability. Blake was already making a theatrical production of the escalated challenge, clearly reveling in the attention and drama he was creating. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced to the substantial crowd that had gathered from throughout the facility, we are about to witness either the most impressive fluke in the entire history of competitive shooting or the most predictably embarrassing failure. 3 consecutive bullseyes at 75 yards with a standard handgun. Absolutely impossible for any untrained amateur. Emma loaded fresh magazines with methodical precision, her movements economical, and practiced in ways that spoke of countless repetitions under various conditions. As she prepared mentally for the sequence ahead, memories of Nathan's patient instruction filtered through her consciousness, like beloved friends returning after a long absence. When the pressure intensifies and everyone's watching your every move, Nathan had taught her during one particularly memorable training session, fall back completely on your fundamental training. Let your body remember what your mind might forget under stress. Trust your preparation. The entire academy had fallen into complete silence, with all attention and focus laser-like on the unprecedented confrontation unfolding before them. Emma took her position carefully, made minute adjustments to her stance, and began the sequence that would determine far more than a simple wager. For her first shot, she took slightly longer than usual to establish her sight picture, allowing her body to settle into the familiar rhythm that Nathan had drilled into her muscle memory over thousands of practice rounds. The sharp crack of the Glock was immediately followed by another perfect hit that drew an audible gasp from the assembled crowd. Blake's jaw visibly tightened, though he maintained his facade of confident superiority. The second shot came more quickly, with Emma's muscle memory fully engaged as she made barely perceptible adjustments to her grip and breathing pattern. Another flawless bullseye appeared on the target, placed with surgical precision that defied explanation. Before taking her third and final shot, Emma twisted her wedding ring once in that same subtle gesture, a small movement that connected her powerfully to Nathan's memory and presence, as if he were standing directly beside her, coaching her through this crucial moment. The final shot split the air with authority and found its mark with unwavering accuracy, completing a perfect sequence that left the entire crowd in stunned silence. Blake's face had drained of all color, his expression frozen somewhere between complete disbelief and barely controlled fury as the implications of what had just occurred began to register fully. The crowd erupted spontaneously into thunderous applause that quickly transformed into a sustained standing ovation for the unassuming woman who had just accomplished something most of them would have believed impossible just minutes earlier. Rebecca returned promptly with all 3 targets, displaying them clearly for official verification and public inspection. There could be absolutely no question about the results. 3 perfect shots at a distance that would challenge even the most experienced competitive shooters. Congratulations, Miss Miller, Rebecca announced formally, unable to keep the genuine admiration from her voice. That was truly remarkable marksmanship by any standard. Blake snatched the targets from Rebecca's hands, examining them with increasing desperation and fury, as if close inspection might somehow reveal previously unnoticed flaws or evidence of elaborate deception that would restore his shattered worldview. This is completely impossible, he hissed, loud enough for nearby spectators to hear clearly. Nobody just walks in off the street and shoots like this without years of extensive professional training. She must have rigged something, the targets, the distance markers, the ammunition, something. Emma remained perfectly calm and composed, though steel entered her voice when she replied with quiet dignity. I believe we had a clear agreement witnessed by everyone present, Mr. Radcliffe. The terms were straightforward and unambiguous. Agreement with a cheater and a fraud. Blake's voice rose dangerously, drawing uncomfortable attention from throughout the facility. I'm not paying $50,000 based on some elaborate confidence game. Rebecca intervened immediately with professional firmness. Mr. Radcliffe, Miss Miller's performance was witnessed by dozens of club members, including Senator Williams and Judge Crawford. The shots were completely legitimate, executed under standard range conditions with Academy-provided ammunition and equipment. Blake rounded on her with barely contained fury, his finger jabbing accusingly through the air inches from her face. You need to remember your place in this organization, Rebecca. One word from me to the board of directors, and your career here is permanently finished. The naked threat silenced Rebecca temporarily, but her expression hardened with barely contained anger at the abuse of power she was witnessing. Emma watched this exchange with quiet but intense focus, her respect for Rebecca's professionalism under pressure growing with each moment. If you're formally accusing me of cheating, Mr. Radcliffe, Emma said with perfect evenness, perhaps we should move this discussion to a more appropriate setting where proper investigative procedures can be followed. Blake completely misinterpreted her diplomatic suggestion. Private discussion so you can avoid the public consequences of your deception? Absolutely not. Let's settle this entire matter right here, in front of everyone. He turned dramatically to address the assembled crowd with theatrical gestures. Ladies and gentlemen, I propose a definitive challenge that will resolve any lingering questions about legitimacy. 1 week from today, a formal competition under controlled conditions, myself versus our mysterious sharpshooter. 10 different shooting stations, varying distances and firearms, with all equipment provided and verified by the Academy to ensure complete fairness and eliminate any possibility of tampering or trickery. Emma realized with growing clarity that she had unintentionally stepped into something much larger and more complex than a simple shooting challenge. Part of her desperately wanted to retreat immediately back into the safety and anonymity of her carefully constructed quiet life. But a stronger part, the part that Nathan had nurtured and encouraged throughout their marriage, knew with absolute certainty that she couldn't back down from a direct challenge without dishonoring both his memory and her own integrity. I accept your proposal, she said quietly, her words carrying clearly across the hushed Academy, despite their soft delivery. Blake's predatory smile was cold and calculating. Excellent decision. Same financial terms as today. $50,000 to your precious veterans charity if you somehow manage to win. And when I inevitably win, you publicly explain whatever deceptive methods you used today, and you agree never to return to any reputable shooting facility anywhere in New England. As the crowd gradually dispersed, buzzing with excitement and speculation about the upcoming competition, Rebecca approached Emma privately with obvious concern. That demonstration was either extraordinarily brave or remarkably foolish, she said quietly, glancing around to ensure their conversation remained private. Blake Radcliffe doesn't handle losing gracefully under the best of circumstances, and he has considerable influence throughout the shooting community and well beyond it. Emma nodded acknowledgement, the adrenaline from her performance beginning to fade and leaving her feeling emotionally drained. I didn't come here today seeking conflict or public attention, Miss Martinez. I simply wanted to honor a promise I made. Rebecca studied her thoughtfully, noting once again the striking disconnect between Emma's modest, unassuming appearance and the exceptional professional-level performance she had just demonstrated. Yet you shot with the precision and technique of someone with extensive military-grade training, Rebecca observed carefully. Who are you really, Emma Miller? Emma gathered her belongings with deliberate care, wrapping her Glock in its protective cloth with the same reverence she had shown throughout the afternoon. Just someone trying to keep faith with the past while finding a way toward an uncertain future, she replied, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the Academy's resumed normal operations. What neither Emma nor anyone else in the exclusive facility knew was that Blake was already making urgent, desperate phone calls from his private office, instructing his personal investigator to uncover absolutely everything possible about Emma Miller, her background, her training, her connections, her vulnerabilities, regardless of what resources were required or what legal and ethical boundaries needed to be crossed in the process. The tremor in Blake's voice as he issued these increasingly frantic instructions revealed far more than simple anger or wounded pride. It betrayed genuine, deep-seated fear because Blake had recognized something in Emma's shooting technique and bearing that the other observers had completely missed. He had seen the distinctive precision and economy of movement that characterized advanced military sniper training, executed with a level of natural competence and professional calm that simply couldn't be faked, purchased, or learned through casual instruction. News of the dramatic confrontation spread with remarkable speed through Boston's tightly interconnected social and business networks. By evening, Blake Radcliffe found himself fielding an endless stream of calls and messages from friends, rivals, corporate sponsors, and journalists, all seeking detailed information about the mysterious woman who had so publicly challenged his long-established supremacy. Seated in his luxurious penthouse apartment overlooking the Charles River, Blake swirled 30-year-old single malt scotch in an expensive crystal tumbler. What should have been his standard post-victory celebration ritual, now serving desperately as a means to calm increasingly frayed nerves and growing anxiety. Jessica Thompson, his girlfriend and carefully managed social media presence, scrolled through her phone with mounting concern, monitoring the rapidly expanding online chatter and social media buzz surrounding the day's unexpected events. "They're calling her the unknown marksman across every platform," Jessica reported, her voice tight with worry and growing alarm. "Someone managed to record part of your final exchange on their phone camera. The video already has over 50,000 views and it's climbing rapidly." Blake drained his expensive glass in one harsh swallow, the premium alcohol burning his throat. One lucky afternoon doesn't transform some random person into a legitimate marksman with real credentials. By next week, everyone will clearly understand that she's nothing but an elaborate fraud. Jessica looked up from her constant phone monitoring, her expression unusually serious for someone typically focused entirely on maintaining Blake's carefully crafted public image and brand management. "Blake, honey, I've watched you compete professionally for 6 years now. I know exactly what genuine skill looks like when I see it. Those weren't lucky shots by any reasonable definition. She's legitimately good, possibly better than anyone you've ever faced in formal competition." The sharp, urgent ring of Blake's secure private phone interrupted their increasingly tense conversation. He checked the caller identification display, immediately straightening with recognition as he saw his private investigator's number. "Tell me you found something substantial and useful," Blake demanded without any preamble, his desperation barely concealed beneath a thin veneer of authoritative control. The professional voice on the other end carried apologetic tones despite Blake's aggressive demands. "Not much of significance yet, Mr. Radcliffe. Emma Miller, 35 years old, currently employed as a senior accountant at Meridian Financial Solutions, relocated to Boston from Virginia Beach approximately 3 years ago. Completely clean background check, pays all taxes promptly, maintains an extremely low public profile. No social media presence whatsoever, no competitive shooting records anywhere, no firearms registrations beyond a basic concealed carry permit." Blake's frustration mounted to dangerous levels, his carefully controlled facade beginning to crack under pressure. That's completely impossible by any logical standard. Nobody develops that level of precision and professional technique without extensive, documented training and regular practice. Dig deeper immediately. Check military connections, law enforcement backgrounds, private instruction records, anything and everything. After ending the call abruptly, Blake began pacing the length of his expansive living room like a caged predator, his mind racing frantically through possibilities and implications that threatened his entire carefully constructed identity. "I simply don't understand how any of this is possible," he muttered to himself, his usual confidence completely shattered. "Where did she acquire those skills? Who trained her? What's her real background?" Jessica watched him with growing unease and a developing sense that she was witnessing something potentially self-destructive unfolding before her eyes. Blake, maybe it's genuinely time to consider letting this entire situation go, she suggested carefully. Pay the charity donation voluntarily. Acknowledge that you encountered an exceptional shooter and move forward with dignity intact. Blake stopped his agitated pacing abruptly, turning to face her with an intensity that made her involuntarily step backward in alarm. This has never been about the money. It never was, he said with frightening intensity. This is about my reputation, my legacy, everything I've built over 15 years of dedicated competition. I will not be humiliated and destroyed by some nobody who wandered in off the street. Across the city, Emma sat quietly at her small kitchen table, staring at her phone as it buzzed persistently with calls from unknown numbers that she had no intention of answering. Michael Torres, Nathan's former teammate and closest friend within the SEAL community, had called 4 times since she left the academy, but she hadn't felt emotionally prepared to face the conversation she knew was inevitably waiting. The military community, particularly among special operations personnel, was significantly smaller and more tightly interconnected than most civilians realized. Word traveled with remarkable speed through informal networks, and exceptional marksmanship, especially from unexpected sources, always attracted immediate attention from those who understood its true significance and rarity. Emma brewed herself a cup of chamomile tea and carried it carefully to her small apartment balcony, allowing the day's intense events to replay through her mind like scenes from someone else's life. Part of her deeply regretted accepting Blake's escalated challenge in the public spectacle it would inevitably create. The unwanted attention was deeply uncomfortable and threatened the quiet anonymity she had so carefully constructed around her grief and healing process over the past 3 years. Yet another part of her felt strangely liberated and energized, as though something vital that had been dormant for far too long had finally awakened after years of emotional hibernation. Her phone buzzed again with yet another unfamiliar number. After a long moment of hesitation, she decided to answer. "Miss Miller, this is Rebecca Martinez from the Elite Marksman's Academy." Emma tensed slightly, uncertain what additional complications this call might bring. "Miss Martinez, what can I do for you this evening?" Rebecca's voice carried an unmistakable undertone of urgency that immediately captured Emma's full attention. "I probably shouldn't be calling you directly like this, but I thought you should be made aware of something important. Blake has initiated a comprehensive background investigation into your personal history and connections. He's absolutely convinced that you used some form of elaborate deception today, and he's determined to prove it regardless of cost or consequence." Emma closed her eyes wearily, unsurprised by this development, but genuinely disappointed by the confirmation of Blake's character. "I appreciate your warning, Miss Martinez, and I'm grateful for your concern. But I have absolutely nothing to hide from any legitimate investigation." Rebecca continued, her voice dropping lower and becoming more confidential. "You need to understand something crucial about Blake Radcliffe and his position in this community. He has extensive, powerful connections throughout Boston, political influence, business relationships, media contacts. His family's wealth and social standing reach into areas and institutions you might not expect. If he feels genuinely threatened by your presence and abilities, he has both the resources and the willingness to make life very difficult for people who challenge him." Emma genuinely appreciated the warning and the obvious concern behind it, but her years as a military spouse had taught her valuable lessons about distinguishing between genuine threats and intimidation tactics designed primarily to create fear and compliance. "I understand your warning completely, and I'm truly grateful for your concern about my welfare," Emma replied with quiet determination. "But I fully intend to honor our agreement and participate in the competition exactly as scheduled." After ending the call, Emma opened the small wooden memory box that contained Nathan's military medals, personal letters, and their wedding photograph, precious relics of a life that felt simultaneously distant and intimately present. Beneath the carefully folded American flag from his military funeral lay Nathan's personal training journal, a detailed, methodical record of techniques, observations, hard-won lessons, and professional insights accumulated throughout his distinguished career. She opened it carefully, finding the pages where he had meticulously documented their practice sessions, together with the same attention to detail he brought to all aspects of his military service. His handwriting was precise and methodical, reflecting his systematic approach to everything related to military operations and training. Emma, 50 yards, 9 out of 10 bullseyes, exceptional natural ability, better instinctive responses than most military recruits, read one early entry that brought tears to her eyes. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, matching Emma's conflicted emotional state perfectly. For the first time in 3 years of dedicated, reliable service, she called in sick to work, unable to face the routine normalcy of office procedures and financial reports after the intensity and emotional upheaval of the previous day. Instead of her usual commute to the corporate offices, she drove to a public shooting range located in a neighboring town, deliberately choosing a facility far removed from the elite academy's exclusive atmosphere and curious, judgmental observers. For 8 consecutive hours, she practiced with methodical dedication and fierce concentration, working systematically through every technique, drill, and exercise that Nathan had patiently taught her during their years together. Each carefully aimed shot became a form of conversation with his cherished memory, a promise renewed and kept, a connection maintained across the seemingly impossible boundary between life and death. That evening brought a brief text message from Rebecca that carried ominous implications. Blake requesting multiple rule changes for competition. Board meeting tomorrow to approve modifications. We'll keep you informed of developments. Emma understood the tactical implications immediately and completely. Blake was systematically restructuring the upcoming competition to showcase the full breadth of his professional training and competitive experience across multiple firearms platforms and shooting disciplines, areas where a talented amateur might struggle despite natural ability with handguns. Emma's response was characteristically simple and direct. "Thank you for keeping me informed. No objections or changes needed from my end." In his luxurious penthouse that same evening, Blake received Rebecca's update with growing satisfaction and renewed confidence in his ability to control the situation's outcome. "Perfect strategic positioning," he told Jessica, with the first genuine smile he had shown in days. 10 different stations, 10 completely different firearms platforms, multiple shooting disciplines and techniques. There's absolutely no possibility she can match my comprehensive expertise across that entire range of weapons and competitive conditions. Jessica set down her wineglass with deliberate, careful precision, her expression troubled by developments she was witnessing. "And if she somehow does match your performance across all those different challenges?" she asked quietly. Blake's returning smile contained absolutely no warmth, humor, or genuine confidence. Only cold calculation and barely concealed desperation. "She won't succeed," he said with false certainty. "But if by some miraculous coincidence she comes close to matching me, I've already arranged some additional insurance to guarantee the final outcome remains in my favor." The day before the highly anticipated competition, Michael Torres finally succeeded in reaching Emma by taking the direct approach of appearing unannounced at her apartment door, with the persistence typical of military friendships forged under extreme stress and danger. "Avoiding my calls isn't going to make this conversation disappear," he said with gruff affection that barely concealed his obvious concern for her welfare. Emma welcomed him into her modest apartment with genuine relief at seeing a familiar, trusted face from her previous life. "I've been processing everything that's happened, Michael. The situation has become far more complicated than I initially anticipated or wanted." Michael conducted a quick but thorough survey of her apartment, immediately noting the shooting manuals and technical references spread across her dining table, along with the basic maintenance kit for Nathan's firearms that had finally emerged from storage after 3 years of neglect. "The entire special operations community is talking about you and this Radcliffe character," he said as they settled across from each other at Emma's small kitchen table. The weight of shared history and mutual understanding, creating immediate intimacy that required no lengthy explanations. "Nathan would be incredibly proud of what you accomplished yesterday," Michael continued earnestly. "Not just the exceptional shooting, but your courage in stepping back into the world and standing up for yourself when challenged. Emma felt unexpected tears threaten as emotions she had kept carefully controlled finally found expression. I'm honestly not entirely sure that's what I'm doing, Michael. This situation escalated far beyond anything I intended or planned when I walked into that place. Michael nodded with complete understanding, born of years navigating similar unexpected challenges. The most important battles in life rarely unfold according to our careful plans, Emma. But sometimes they turn out to be exactly what we need, even when we don't recognize it at the time. He reached across the small table, his weathered, experienced hand covering hers briefly in a gesture of solidarity that transcended the need for words or detailed explanations. You should know that you're not facing this challenge alone, he said with quiet intensity. I've reached out to some of Nathan's other teammates and brothers in arms. There will be friendly, supportive faces in tomorrow's audience, people who understand exactly what you're representing and why it matters. As Michael prepared to leave, he turned back at the door with the serious, focused expression Emma remembered from her husband's most important and meaningful conversations. One final thing that you need to understand clearly, he said with unmistakable gravity. Be extremely careful with this Radcliffe character and his entire organization. A man like that, with his kind of inherited wealth and political connections, isn't accustomed to losing publicly or being challenged by people he considers beneath his social status. He won't accept defeat gracefully, and he may not limit himself to fair, honorable tactics. Nathan would want you to watch your six and trust your instincts about danger. Emma nodded with genuine appreciation for both the warning and the return to familiar military terminology that connected her powerfully to Nathan's world and the values he had represented. I understand completely, Michael, and thank you for the guest pass that started all of this, for pushing me to honor my promise to Nathan when I wasn't ready to do it myself. Michael's smile was warm, genuine, and filled with the kind of understanding that came from shared loss and mutual respect. Just keeping faith with a fallen brother, Emma. That's what we do for each other, always and without question.